It's finally summer and I don't own any swimming shorts, so I decided to upcycle 2 pairs into one much cooler pair. So I was in Sweden recently and they have a ton of secondhand shops and I got a lot of pieces. One of the pieces I picked up were these swim shorts for 80 crowns, which is around £6.20. And like with all clothing made for men, they don't tend to fit me that well. I just have bigger thighs than most men do, so they're very hard to pull up and they just stretch really badly around my legs. So to rectify this, I decided to pick up a second pair of swim shorts in a charity shop here in England, and I got these ones for £2. And they're originally from Primark, so I probably didn't get much of a deal on them, but I do like shopping secondhand anyway. With both pieces now in my possession, I then went on to the sewing part. Firstly, I cut the yellow trunks down the side of them so that they could be sewn onto, and also widened to get a better fit without needing to remove any of the original fabric. I always try and be as low waist as possible with these projects, and for these shorts in particular, I didn't have to cut off any of the fabric, so they really help with keeping this a low waist project, even though I didn't use as much as the second shorts. Then I went on to cutting out the green shorts. Firstly, I cut out 2 side strips for my shorts. These were slightly tapered, but not by much. I probably could have tapered them more, just a tad, as these swim shorts don't end up very tight around my waist, meaning that they could fall down, but I'm thinking that my hips will probably keep them up quite well, so it's not too big of an issue. I just wish the waist was slightly smaller. Next, I went on to adding the designs onto these shorts. I really wanted it to look like seaweed with the yellow base acting as sand, so I drew out a vaguely seaweed looking blob onto the green fabric that covered a significant portion of the front and slightly less at the back. Realistically, I don't want to have too much interest sewn onto my ass because I don't want people staring at my ass, so I tried to keep as much interest as possible on the front of the shorts just because that's a more normal place for people to look, I think. With the design finalized, I then went on to the section that's basically just like tracing but with a sewing machine. It's slightly easier to do with shapes like these if you don't cut them out beforehand, but I forgot about that for the front shape, so I ended up pre-cutting it out. It's not impossible to do if you cut it out, it just makes your margin of error much smaller, and I got a lot more sharp corners on these natural shapes than I wanted. That these are still quite fun to do with this method because you really can make the fabric into any shape you wanted to just by sewing 2 pieces good size together and then turning it the right way out afterwards. I really want to do more experimentation with this method where I use it as the base of the clothing rather than as a decal. I just want to create more interesting designs that look even less buyable than what I currently make, because after all, if you're going to sew your own clothes, they might as well look like you've sewn them, in my opinion. So it's much more fun to make pieces that no one else can have. With the seaweed pieces all finished, I then ironed them flat and sewed them directly onto the shorts, basically with the same tactic as I did for the last section, so you just trace around the edges with the sewing machine. This was slightly more fiddly as I had to make sure I wasn't showing the mesh or the pockets onto the outside of the fabric, so I had to keep checking these sections were pinned out of the way, but other than that it was just as easy to do as the last step. This is such an easy and quick project that you could do without a machine. Obviously the machine makes it much quicker, but you could very much trace an image in the same way just using hand sewing. Upcycling in general is much more accessible than sewing from scratch. You don't even need to sew for a lot of upcycling projects. For example, with these shorts, I could have just cut down the size of them and put lots of safety pins down them. It's not really my style, but I see people wearing that sort of thing all the time and I think it looks really cool. You could also make them a little bit more my style by putting ribbons instead of safety pin down them. That's quite common as well. For that, you probably just need eyelets and you can just get an eyelet press for that. I went on a little bit of a tangent there. All I was trying to say is that upcycling is so much easier and probably more fun than sewing from scratch for most people, including myself. That's not to say I don't like sewing from scratch, I love sewing from scratch, but these sorts of projects are really easy to get your teeth into and knock out in just a couple hours. Back onto the sewing project, I then added the panels down the side of the shorts and I tried to make these look as neat as possible and match the original design as much as possible by adding stitching details down the seam and along the bottom. My machine was definitely struggling over the waistband, but it was all fine in the end. I just put my machine through a lot. If you've watched my other videos, you would have heard me talk about that before. I just really need to give my machine a very well needed break. Sometimes I'm literally up until like 2 AM sewing when I've been sewing all day, and it makes the worst noises because I have like 8 layers of fabric going through it at once. But I don't think I'd be able to do any of those projects without my machine, so I really need to keep better care of it. Next, I hand sewed the mesh back together on the inside of the shorts. This is part of the design that I don't think I should have really done. It just makes the shorts fit a little bit weirdly, so I'm thinking of just cutting the mesh out altogether. And then finally I added the waist ties back into the shorts. For these, I took the 2 waist ties to the original shorts and sewed them together to make it longer. And then in areas where I have a new seam, I just added little holes so I could thread it through over the seam rather than trying to get it through where I had all the stitching done. With that said, these shorts are actually finished and I can finally show you the result. overall I'm quite happy with these. I feel like they're a good project to do just before the summer so you have a more interesting pair of shorts to wear. But like I've been saying throughout this video, there are quite a few issues with these. One is that the waistband is just too big, so I'm worried about them falling down. And the second is that the meshing on the inside is just in the way, so I'm probably going to cut it out. But even with those two things, I do really like the design of these shorts. I feel like they came out really good. I do wish I'd used more of the green, however, because I did want it to be as low waist as possible. And for this project in particular, I did end up with a lot of the green left over. So that's all been added into my scrap bin, which at this point is completely full. I really need to think of a project to do with all the scrap pieces. So if you have a really good scrap piece idea, please leave it down below in the comments because I'd really appreciate that. But yeah, overall, I'm pretty happy with these. They are not the best, but I feel like they're a good upcycling piece to start off the summer, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what else I'll make over the summer period, because I have a little bit more time over the summer because my job is just slightly less busy at this time of year. So hopefully I'll be able to do a lot more sewing projects in the next coming weeks. But yeah, with that said, that is it for this video. If you did enjoy it, please give a like down below, comment what else you'd like me to do, and subscribe as I post a new video every single week, and I'd love to see you again. But until then, bye!